It is our honor to co-host this U.S. Senate debate with the Clinton School of Public Service. The Clinton School, as each of you know, is truly an Arkansas treasure. In a very short time, just a few years, the Clinton School has not only established itself as a one-of-a-kind educational institution, but it also has established itself as perhaps one of the best, if not the best, and most diverse and most prolific public programs, speakers program in the nation, right here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'd like to say a very special thank you to Dean Skip Rutherford, to his staff, Nikolai DePippa, to Ben Beaumont, to the student volunteers from the Clinton School, to Jean Wallace and her volunteers at the check-in table, to Art English at UALR and his student volunteers who helped us plan and execute today's debate for everyone here today. Let's give them a round of applause as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you today that democracy simply could not survive without debate. And perhaps the greatest protection that we have against tyranny in our society is the free and open discussion of competing ideas. Today's debate is the third and final amongst these candidates. Early voting has already begun in Arkansas, across the state, and primary voting will conclude next Tuesday evening. I guess that you could say that the 2010 primary season has entered its final hours. Without a doubt, the candidates that you will hear from today are part of the marquee race among the multitude of exciting 2010 Arkansas primary races. To put this race in perspective, I contacted the U.S. Senate historian this morning, and I was informed that this is the first time in 36 years that Arkansas has had a sitting United States senator challenged in a primary from either party. It used to be a more common occurrence. Over the 54-year span from 1920 to 1974, it happened 11 times. And only twice out of those 11 times was the challenger victorious. So that is the stage that we have set here today for the challenge of the challengers and the challenge of the incumbent. With no further ado, I would like to bring them to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Democratic candidates for the United States Senate race from Arkansas, U.S. Senator Blanche Lincoln, Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter, and D.C. Morrison. Each of you in this room has a silent role to play in this debate. When you came in and took your seat, there was a note card on your chair or at your table. We would like for each of you, if you have a question, to please fill it out. We have volunteers around the room who will come by, walking by you, just hand them the note card, and we will hand those to our moderator today. I also would like to state to you very clearly the ground rules of our audience. There will be no applause until the debate concludes at 1 p.m. There will be no audience participation, no audience reaction, nor will there be audience disruption. And we thank you very much for your adherence to these ground rules. Our moderator today has been a fixture on Arkansas television since 1968. He is widely regarded as one of the most well-known and well-respected journalists our state has ever produced. He is the host of the political news program Arkansas Week on AETN. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Steve Barnes.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I assume that you all have cards and that you are busy filling them out. I have some questions. There will be questions, hopefully as many from you as possible. Keep those cards and letters coming in, folks. You won't know my questions from theirs. We'll begin with opening statements. And according to the protocol approved by the candidates before this event began, Governor Halter, you go first. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Senator Lincoln, Mr. Morrison, good to see you. Thanks to the Clinton School and thanks to Political Animals. Arkansans have a very clear choice on Tuesday. We can choose to continue the policies of the past 10 years, or we can vote to change Washington. And if we continue to send the same people to Washington, you're guaranteed to get the same results. And folks, we all know those results have not been good lately. Unemployment and home foreclosures are at record levels, and we're over $12 trillion in our national debt. $160,000 of debt for every Arkansas family of 4. To add insult to injury, Washington has given a $700 billion bailout to Wall Street banks with no strings attached. Most of these results are due to the power in Washington of special interest, the power to block or water down the changes that we need for middle-class families. Now, Senator Lincoln's campaign contributors are a who's who of these special interests. She's received over $1 million from Wall Street banks, hundreds of thousands of dollars from insurance companies, hundreds of thousands of dollars from big oil. Senator Lincoln has referred to herself as the rope in a tug of war between competing interests, constantly being pulled in different directions. Folks, as your United States Senator, I won't be the rope. I'll be the guy pulling the rope on behalf of middle-class families. Now, some believe that the power of these interest groups is such that they and their money can't be overcome. But together we have beaten them. We passed the scholarship lottery, and 28,000 Arkansas families are going to get assistance beginning next week. And we can beat the special interest again. Because on Election Day, the nurse in Fort Smith, the teacher in Conway, and the retiree in Hot Springs are more powerful than the Wall Street banker and the insurance CEO. It's your vote, not their money, that will determine this election. Thank you.
Governor, thank you. Senator Lincoln.
Thank you, Steve, and a special thanks to Steve Ronell and the Political Animals Club, Skip Rutherford, the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, for hosting this final debate of the Democratic primary. It's been a tough campaign, and as we near the election day, I have to say I have thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to hear from Arkansans about their concerns and their hopes for our future. I understand that people are frustrated and they're disappointed with Washington, because I am too. And that's why I stand up to the special interest in Washington to do the right thing for Arkansas. Last year, I told the D.C. unions I wouldn't support the Employee Free Choice Act, or the card check bill as it's known. It would make small businesses in Arkansas even more vulnerable to the fragile economy that we find ourselves in. Standing up to special interests, I voted for health care reform. Might not have been good politically, but it's the right thing to do for Arkansas small businesses and our working families. And it's why, as Ag Chairman, I introduced the toughest bill on Wall Street. Nobody thought I would or that I could, but I did, and Wall Street banks aren't happy about it. Today, the labor unions are funding my opponent in this primary because I wouldn't agree with them 100% of the time. Unfortunately, they don't appreciate that 27% of Arkansas workers are employed by small businesses. Today's efforts by Republicans to repeal health care reform before it has even had a chance to work are politically motivated and would guarantee more years of insurance company discrimination against patients and employers. And even as the Senate considers my Wall Street reform bill, many are saying that it won't pass. I say it can't pass if we don't try, and I'm determined to protect Main Street from Wall Street speculators. My job is to represent you. I'll stand up to special interests because that's what it takes to stand up for Arkansas. That's my job as your United States Senator, is to put Arkansas first, and that's why I'm the best candidate for this job. I know how to work hard on behalf of Arkansans, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Morrison.
Yes. Thank you, Political Animals Club, for putting this together. Steve Ronell. Thank you, folks, for coming out today, taking time out of your day to come out and participate. We all appreciate it. I would like to ask you if you recall home ownership for every American, something we heard a lot about over the last 20 or 30 years. It's a good idea when people have saved money to buy a home. Congress began meddling in the home ownership market back in the Jimmy Carter administration. Each successive administration doubled down on it. Banks were accused of redlining, not making loans in certain areas. If you're creditworthy, you deserve a loan. But congressional meddling and trying to shape the economy by votes through their policy resulted in an overheating of the home ownership market. The GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, are bankrupt. Their efforts and their lack of management had to be picked up by the American taxpayer. Those same people, that same class of people, now want to control your health care. I say no. I'm not in favor of government-run health care. If the just passed bill stands, in 7 to 10 years, there will be no private insurance. You will stand in line for your health care and you will talk to a government clerk, not a doctor. If I'm elected, I want to improve health care for all Americans, but not turn it over to the government. Their track record just doesn't justify it. The other thing that I think is very important to our nation is our border security. We must secure the southern border. There have been 17,000 murders in northern Mexico in the last 3 years. Our government, what's their response to the state of Arizona when they pass a law to try to control it? They attack the state of Arizona. The other thing that I would like to do that I think will bring our jobs back would be to pass the fair tax and let our companies
Have to call
compete
time, Mr. Morrison.
with foreign companies. Thank you.
Okay, the question and rebuttal period of this afternoon's engagement by pre-agreement of the candidates, 1 minute for answer and 1 minute for rebuttal. First question goes to Senator Lincoln. Senator, the President has appointed a deficit and debt study commission, a bipartisan commission. The bipartisan policy group has a similar commission. Forget the Democratic co-chairman. The Republican co-chairs, both, combined, they have more than a half-century of federal fiscal experience. Mr. Domenici was, of course, chairman of the Budget Committee at one time. Both the Republican co-chairs say that if you take new taxes off the table, then and rely only on spending cuts and growth, then we might as well all go home, because there is no way to reduce a deficit, and certainly not debt, without new taxes. Do you agree, or by taking them off the table, do you agree? And if so, what revenue sources would you look to?
Well, I think the most critical thing that we have to look at in terms of eliminating the debt is a lot of what we saw President Clinton do, and that was creating a balance of where we deal with this debt. Obviously, there are reasonable spending cuts that can be made, and I think that we should look at that. The President's offered us some, and certainly as we move through the budgets as well as the appropriations, we'll look for those spending cuts. But you can't do it all with spending cuts, and they're exactly right. You have to look at mandatory spending programs like Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. Those are the largest parts of the spending measures that we have. And so making sure what we did in healthcare reform, which was to create greater efficiency in healthcare delivery, making sure that we added 10 years of solvency to the Medicare Trust Fund, but we did so by making greater efficiencies and bringing down the cost of healthcare. We saved about $132 billion in the first 10 years and almost $1 trillion in the second 10 years. And yes, we do have to balance the tax code. There's no doubt that we could do a better job, particularly in the largest line item of the tax code, and that is the exclusion for health insurance and for health care. So there's multiple ways we can do it, and I hope we'll look at all of them.
Time. Senator. Mr. Morrison, first rebuttal.
My response would be no new taxes. No new taxes. The government wastes too much money. We could cut every federal agency across the board except Defense and Border Security by 10% to start, and the lives of the people of Arkansas would not be affected one bit. Then we could cut again another 10% the next go around. Washington has to live the way the people of the state of Arkansas live.
Governor Halter.
Well, I think it's important to point out that in the last 10 years, we've added $7 trillion to our national debt. And if you check the record, Senator Lincoln voted for every one but one of the major provisions that added to those deficits and to that debt. Also, the other day, she started attacking me on Social Security by distorting my record, but I think she just said here that in terms of balancing the budget, if I heard her correctly, that we need to look at Medicare and Social Security. So I would ask her to stop attacking me about Social Security when it sounds like she just put Social Security on the table. Now, to your question about taxes, I do think that we need to eliminate some tax loopholes. There are tax loopholes that provide incentives for American companies to ship jobs overseas. The first bill I would introduce as a senator is to end those tax provisions, use a portion of it to provide tax credits to provide jobs here at home, and use another portion of it to reduce the deficit.
Thank you, sir. The next question goes first to Mr. Morrison. You have said, sir, that, and I think in an advertisement this morning, in this morning's statewide daily, you have indicated that you want to see a regeneration of manufacturing in America, more manufacturing jobs in the United States, bring them back. How would you do that, sir, without, and based on some previous statements of yours, how would you do that without abrogating certain trade agreements, or would you advocate withdrawing from certain trade agreements? And would doing so jeopardize some of Arkansas's $1 billion in exports? Would you fear starting a trade war?
It takes, according to articles that I read, $550,000 of capital investment to create a job in heavy industry. That's a lot of money. Our tax code rewards debt and penalizes profits. I believe the best thing that we can do to bring our jobs back, and I wish all you folks would go to fairtax.org, order the book, The Fair Tax Solution, and see what you think. Make up your own mind. I would like to pass the fair tax. That way, when Chinese products come in, they are taxed. This allows our companies to build capital and finance their expansions with equity, not with debt. Low-income people are protected in the fair tax and with a prebate, and it would allow our jobs to come back. It would let our companies compete with overseas.
I have to call time there, sir.
Yes, sir.
Governor Halter.
Thank you, Steve, for the question. In the limit of 60 seconds, I'll just focus on 3 items. First, I mentioned the tax provisions that actually give incentives now for American companies to move jobs overseas. I would reverse those, provide credits for American companies to provide jobs here. Secondly, let's make sure that all future trade deals are fair and balanced. If you give American workers and Arkansans a level playing field, we can compete and win in the 21st century economy. And finally, let's push back hard on those countries that are manipulating their currencies, like China, that give them an unfair advantage in international markets. I would push very hard for that.
Thank you, Governor Halter. The next question goes first. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Lincoln. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Well, I think without a doubt, one of the ways to increase manufacturing is to open up markets for us. Opening up Cuba would be an enormous place where we could open up markets, but certainly in some of the other free trade agreements that we have worked through, particularly Panama, also Colombia, where our borders are open, our markets are open to all of their products, and theirs are not to our products. And I think that's important. I agree that competition is critical, and we've got to make sure that we lower our costs for our manufacturing, ensuring that they can be competitive in a global economy. I agree with Bill that China currency, I'm on a bill that would actually do just that in terms of China's currency and the way that they've manipulated it, disallow that. And I've also fought before the ITC to ensure that trade deals that we do negotiate are actually implemented in a fair and balanced way, that we require our trading partners to actually come to the table and do what they said they would do in the trade agreements that we reached. We've been able to save an awful lot of Arkansas jobs that way, and I've certainly going to continue to work to that vein. But I think those are multiple ways that we can ensure that we increase manufacturing in this great country of ours, is opening up those markets and making sure that we adhere to those trade agreements.
Time. Thank you very much. Next question goes first to Governor Halter. Sir, it's argued that the Tea Party movement, in effect, represents a certain divisiveness in the American psyche, that we have, frankly, gone soft, and that we as Americans are spoiled. We want air traffic controllers, cops, doctors, highways, the Food and Drug Administration, but we admit in survey after survey after survey that we don't want to pay for it. We don't want additional taxes. Are we spoiled, sir? And is it time that we are going to have to accept the notion of sacrifice? Every household, except perhaps the very lowest income.
Steve, I don't think middle-class families in Arkansas right now are feeling spoiled. I think they're feeling pretty beat up on by special interests in Washington that are getting their way. The frustration that you see expressed through the Tea Party and through others, I believe, is fundamentally a frustration that their government in Washington is not working for them. And there are example after example of this. We had a $700 billion bailout, which Senator Lincoln voted for. Very few strings attached to it. We've had trade agreements that most Arkansas workers view as unfair. We've had a tax burden that has largely fallen on the middle class. Certainly, the explosion of debt is going to fall on the backs of middle-class families, their children, and their grandchildren. This frustration, I don't think, is about being spoiled. This frustration is that Washington is not working. And if you want more of the same, send the same people back.
Senator Lincoln, first rebuttal.
Well, I believe, Steve, that we live in the greatest country on the face of this earth, and it's our responsibility to do the best to make it better. And that's exactly what I do every day in my efforts. And I think that it's not that we're spoiled, but we've lived beyond our means. And I think people realize that. There is no doubt that there's been tremendous greed over the last 10 years. Dark markets have existed in Wall Street, and that greed has taken over. We had no clue of what those markets were like until we looked into that rearview mirror a couple of years ago and began to see a $600 trillion derivatives market that was extremely risky and put at risk our economy. And that's exactly why I've worked hard to put the toughest bill out there in terms of Wall Street and dealing with that Wall Street greed. And we'll continue to work to make that happen. But I also think that we all do have to tighten our belts, and we all have to look and see what's important to us. We have to make a commitment to what's important to us. And I know that I'm very predictable in terms of what I'm committed to. I'm committed to my faith and to my family and to my loyalty to the people of Arkansas. And I'll work hard to ensure we put our economy back on track and we put people back to work and make our country strong again.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison.
Yes, I don't believe that the people of Arkansas are spoiled, but I think if you look at the papers and you see what's going on in Greece and around the world, the Greeks are rioting in the streets because they're being told that they have to live within their means. I've mentioned before to folks, would you go into your child's room and steal money that they've earned babysitting or mowing the lawn? Of course you wouldn't, but Washington would. Washington has to live within their means. They're running up debts that our children and grandchildren will have to pay. So we have to do something about that. We have to cut spending and make our government responsible to us.
Next question goes first to Senator Lincoln. Senator, you and your colleague, the gentleman from Arizona, have introduced some estate tax legislation, which would take the $10 million exemption, I think, to a 35% tax rate. I think the CBO estimate is that the revenue loss would be about somewhere between 80 and 100 billion dollars. Under the PAYGO ethic or procedure of the Senate, are you not obligated to offer a spending cut, and how would you do that?
Well,
Where?
first of all, the important thing to remember is that there is no estate tax right now, and I don't think that's appropriate. In 2010, the estate tax went to zero. It was eliminated. And I think it's most appropriate that we come back with an estate tax that really fits the economy of today. Those that are hit the hardest by estate tax are small businesses, farms, ranches, those that are really producing the jobs in this country, and they haven't been able to access capital in this country. Wall Street has sequestered much of that capital, and they haven't been able to get to it. And I think it's important that we put a reasonable rate and a reasonable exemption in there so small businesses and family-owned businesses can actually access their own capital to put back into their businesses and to create the jobs that they do. 97% of the people that work in this state work for a small business or self-employed, and I think it's really critical that we give them the capital to create those jobs. Yes, it is under the PAYGO rule, and yes, it would have to be paid for, and that was every intention. It's a little bit less than what you mentioned, but the fact is that, yes, we actually do intend to pay for it, and we've looked at several different ways to do that. We haven't come to a conclusion, but looking at how we bring about a reasonable compromise and a common ground of where we need to be on making sure that small businesses actually can put their own capital back into their businesses. I don't think anybody in this room believes that you should work all your life and have to give 55% of it to the government.
Got to call time. Mr. Halter.
Well, if you want to see a clear distinction between Senator Lincoln and myself, there's not one clearer than this. At a time of $1.4 trillion deficit, Senator Lincoln is posing a tax cut of somewhere between $85 and $250 billion for people that have $10 million in wealth or more. She was just asked how she'd pay for it. She didn't answer that question. I'm going to tell you the last thing we need right now with $1.4 trillion deficits is to provide another tax cut for the wealthy, people with more than $10 million of wealth. Now, there are other differences, and they're all tied in here directly along these lines. You know, I asked Senator Lincoln to give back the contributions from Goldman Sachs. She gave back a portion of it. I'm going to ask her today, because there are now 8 more banks under investigation by the Attorney General in New York, and she has taken $125,000 in campaign contributions from those banks, and I'm going to ask Senator Lincoln today to give those contributions back, because it is past time for middle-class Arkansas families to have a senator that represents them and not the Chamber of Commerce and not people with $10 million of wealth.
Mr. Morrison, 1 minute.
Yes. In my opinion, PAYGO is kind of sleight of hand. It takes money from one federal program that is not paid for and puts it toward another federal program that is not paid for. Until we pay off the debt, nothing is paid for. It reminds me of what a farmer said to me about 20 years ago when I sold farm chemicals. He said, if I'd paid my fertilizer bill, I wouldn't have made a dime this year. So we have to have responsibility. I support an estate tax. We need to have an estate tax. I looked on the internet. I did a little research. It affects very few businesses in the nation. 261, according to this report, in 2009. Our charitable organizations would be greatly impacted if we did away with the estate tax. If it goes back to an exemption of 7 to 10 million, I think that would be fine. And if you will call a good financial planner, if any of you in the room have a problem with a $20 million estate, if you will call a good financial planner, there's a lot of things that you can do to shelter that. And it's a great problem to have.
Leave him laughing, Mr. Morrison. I got to call time here. Next question goes first to Mr. Morrison. Many, if not most, of the Western democracies, and perhaps some of the Pacific or Asian countries as well, have long had a policy of mandatory national service, either in the military, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, the Public Health Service, or another civilian branch, but a mandatory minimum period of public service. Should that be imposed in the United States? Should we demand that of our youth in the United States?
No, I don't believe we should demand that of our youth. I think they should be free to choose their own career path. What's disappointing to me is that 2/3 of our high school seniors cannot qualify for military service. That's very disappointing. The other countries that you talk about don't have the freedoms that we have. They don't have the individual responsibility, the yearning to succeed. They're oppressed by their government, and it takes away their spirit. So I would not be in favor of mandatory national service, no.
Senator Lincoln.
Well, first of all, just to answer a few of the other questions, it's not $10 million or more, Bill. It is a $5 million exemption and a $10 million unified credit. And if you look, I visited with the Forrest family from Arkansas just day before yesterday, who had spent the last 15 years paying off an estate tax and had not been able to manage their family forest, which is one of the problems we have in not having the kind of jobs in the wood products industry in Arkansas, is because when we have private landowners where land values continue to increase and equipment costs that go up, not to mention real estate and building costs, then our small manufacturers and our small businesses cannot survive. I think that's important. And just to also note one of Bill's other comments, my only comment to him was I did not support a decrease in benefits to Social Security benefits. That was one of the things he had commented in the last debate that he did, and I just wanted to make sure that I don't propose to balance the budget by decreasing Social Security benefits. I do not believe in mandatory military service, but I do believe in mandatory public service. I think it's not too much to ask of any of us as Americans to spend at least 1 year in mandatory public service, whether it's in teaching, whether it's in social services, whether it's in the military or anywhere else.
Call time. Thank you, Senator. Mr. Halter.
I don't believe in mandatory service, but I would support and do support programs that give incentives to our young people to engage in that service and to help them financially when they do. I think one of the things that we are meant to do as public officials is do everything we can to give our young people the possibility of living up to the fullness of their God-given potential, and one of the ways to do that is to help them with higher education. That was the point of the scholarship program, but I also think that we can give additional incentives to young people to participate in service by then giving them credit toward their college expenses. I'll go back to the estate tax. I just cannot believe in a time when we've got the debt that we have, the deficits that we have, that we actually have somebody proposing an $80 to $250 billion tax cut for people that have $10 million of net wealth.
Next question goes first to Governor Halter. So understandable, I guess, given the domestic agenda of the last 18 months, 2 years, but a foreign affairs question, if I may. All of you are running for the United States Senate or to continue in the United States Senate, which has certain foreign policy oversight powers that are somewhat greater than in the House. Should the United States be, and the question of inevitability cast aside, should the United States be prepared to accept a nuclear-armed Iran, or would it, or would an ally be justified in taking preemptive action?
We should absolutely,
to prevent it.
We should absolutely never be prepared to accept a nuclear-armed Iran, and we should do everything that we can do within the powers of the United States and within the powers of our allies to prevent that from happening. And I will tell you that this is very much related to the fact that for the last 35 years, Washington has failed to develop an appropriate energy policy which would stop us from spending $1 billion a day on imported oil, $100 million a day going into Iran's coffers, which they are then using in ways that are not advancing our foreign policy interests. This is a clear failure of Washington, but under no circumstances should we be prepared to accept a nuclear-armed Iran.
Mr. Morrison.
Yes, I think that nations have a responsibility to defend themselves. Iran and the leaders in Iran are way out of the mainstream. They're out there somewhere that I don't even know what goes through their mind. To want to have nuclear weapons, to attack their neighbors and possibly us, no way that we should accept that. So I think that, I'm very disappointed when our president goes around the world apologizing for the United States of America. We have done more than any country in the history of the world to help other people. We have a right to defend ourselves. We have a right to defend our allies. Another thing that disappoints me is Senator Lincoln will not stand up and criticize our president when he does that. When he's wrong, he needs to be criticized.
Senator Lincoln.
Thank you. I certainly adhere to standing up for Arkansas, and whenever the president is wrong, I do stand up and challenge him on that, but when he's right, I stick with him. And I think it is important to deal with Iran. I do not believe that they should be allowed nuclear arms or the nuclear proliferation. I've actually supported the Iran sanctions bill, which should be brought up actually in the next 2 weeks. It's been conferenced between the House and the Senate, which would obviously impact with sanctions on Iran in terms of their ability to re-import refined oil, which should put a real chink in their armor and certainly give them a hard time. I think that there's other things that we can do, though, and I think we have to have allies across the globe to be able to help us enforce those things. We cannot do that by ourselves. So I think that the development of better policies as well as diplomatic ties to be able to combat what Iran has been doing and will continue to do if we don't build those good relationships and those political allies. And I think that the president has been working hard on that, D.C. I think he's been working hard to create those allies, those diplomatic allies globally so that we don't have to go and deal with Iran by ourselves.
Senator, thank you. Next question goes first to the Senator. Your legislation regarding Wall Street, the title regulation of the securities market. Criticism of your legislation has ranged from the sort of neutral that you are throwing baby and bathwater out to the openly cynical that this is an election year maneuver on your part and legislation that is quickly to be dropped in subsequent weeks. Your response?
Well, I think all you have to do is look at what I've done. I've stood up to those special interest groups. I've produced the toughest bill of anybody in Washington, including the administration or the rest of the Congress. And I produced a bill that's very simplistic, and it goes back to the root of who we are as Arkansans. If you want to be a bank, be a bank. If you want to deal in risky derivatives and risky swap activities that are going to put an undue burden on taxpayers and on depositors in the bank, then you've got to take that activity outside the bank. I don't think that that's so unusual or, to the magnitude that people think that I've come up with something that's unbelievably crazy. I just think it makes sense. I don't think you, the taxpayer, or me, the taxpayer, or the depositors should be left holding the bag again. And the best way to do that is to separate that activity out. Now, let me tell you, people have said, I can't believe she did it. Oh, the cynical idea that I did it for a political year, that's absolutely crazy, too. Look at what's happened. I've passed the only bipartisan bill out of the Senate Agriculture Committee. I've passed the bill, or at least turned down the alternative bill with 2 Republican votes, the only bipartisan bill off the floor of the Senate.
We're in time deficit
here,
here,
I just think it's going to be good for the
Senator.
American people, and I hope that people will pay attention to it.
Got to throw the flag. Governor Halter.
Well, Steve, you're right. You pointed out that multiple publications are saying that people in Washington are talking about the kind of bait and switch, that this bill's out there until next Tuesday for the primary, and after that, it'll disappear without being voted on. But I don't think we even need to focus on that. Let's just focus on what's happened in the last 10 or 12 years. Senator Lincoln voted for the deregulation bill that caused this in the first place, was on the Committee of Jurisdiction and Oversight, failed to provide that oversight for 10 years. This derivative problem didn't build up in 24 hours. It took years to do so. This is 10 years too late for the millions of Americans that have lost their jobs. It's 10 years too late for the hundreds of millions of dollars who've got their retirement incomes cut. I'd say if you want more of this Washington dance and Washington shuffle, you got your choice. But if you want change, I'd encourage you to look at voting for me.
Mr. Morrison.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Mr. Warren Buffett. He says if you don't understand it, don't buy it. And that's what derivatives are. They're complex financial instruments designed to create the opportunity for large commissions. If the real product is stainless steel, the derivative is plastic and paper mache. After the Great Depression, the Congress passed Glass-Steagall, which separated banks from commerce. In the late 90s, Citibank bought Travelers. They found a loophole in the law, and they bought Travelers. They then coerced Congress that, hey, this is going to be great. We can make all this money. Everything will be fine. And they passed Graham-Leach-Biley. In my opinion, when you've got an organization in one building that supposedly has a Chinese wall separating this office from the other office, that's a lie. That's fake. I don't buy it. So we should go back to separating the banks. Thank you.
Got to call time again, sir. Next question goes first to Governor Halter. Sir, are you prepared today to give a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many point proposal for salvaging, for rescuing Social Security?
Yes, let me first say, Steve, that I was honored to lead the Social Security Administration as the Deputy Commissioner of Social Security. I've fought hard for the protection of Social Security and fought against the privatization of Social Security, despite what is being said during this campaign. One of the most important things that we can do is get the economy moving again, because we know that as the economy slows down, revenues going into Social Security slow down as well, and spending for Social Security disability payments winds up going up because there are folks that claim disability payments early. Secondly, one of the things that we absolutely can do to protect the Social Security Trust Fund is to stop masking the size of the federal deficit with the Social Security surpluses we're running. We had that circumstance beginning to develop in 1999 and 2000, but the last 10 years of fiscal policy have been a wreck, and that additional $7 trillion of deficits and debt is going to put even more pressure on resolving the Social Security solvency problem for the long term. I'm out of time.
Senator Lincoln.
Well, I've consistently opposed attempts to privatize Social Security, and the only comments we've made is what actually Bill said in a speech in Pennsylvania, which was he did believe that you could invest Social Security in the stock market. Look at where we would be after the financial crisis we've seen over the last 2 years. I do not support reductions in Social Security's current guaranteed benefits. I think there are other ways to create efficiencies in Social Security, and I think we must. But I also think that Social Security is not our most immediate problem. We know that it's solvent up until, I think, 2035, 2036. Right now, Medicare is the one that's at risk, and we've got to do something about that. We've done it in the health care reform bill. We've added 10 years of solvency to the Medicare Trust Fund past 2017, and I think those are areas where we can certainly focus on things that have a more immediate devastation. I do agree that without a doubt the best way to shore up Social Security is to put people back to work, to create jobs, and to put our economy back on track, and that's exactly what I've done in everything from the extenders package to the recovery bill and others in getting our Kansans back to work.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I think I owe the candidates an apology. I think the last question was supposed to go to Mr. Morrison, but anyway, it's your rebuttal time, I think, sir.
Yes, we must do everything necessary to save Social Security. When Social Security began in 1936, they immediately began paying out without an accumulation phase. But it worked because there were 16 people working in the economy for each recipient. Today, there are 3 people working in the economy for each recipient, and pretty soon it's going to be 2 people working for each recipient. Congress in 1981 began to raid the Social Security Trust Fund and replaced it with IOU. You sent hard-earned cash to the government, and they kept it in a trust fund for a while, then they started raiding it and used it for who knows what, pork barrel projects, wasteful spending. Sometimes I hear people in Washington say, well, that's only 1%. They talk about some program, it's only 1%. 1% over 10 years is 10%. It adds up. So we have to have responsibility up there. We need to do what's necessary to save Social Security. It's a promise been made to you, the taxpayers, and we need to do everything that we can to fulfill that promise.
Thank you. And I think the next question goes first to Mr. Morrison, if I can reverse it back. I hope I haven't skewed the primary here, but it skewed it, I said. Sort of a two-part question, sir, beginning with Mr. Morrison. Should Congress raise the liability limit for oil company oil spills? And two, what does the BP Gulf disaster tell us, if anything, about our reliance on fossil fuels, and how would that affect your votes in the Senate?
The oil companies need to be held responsible for their mistakes. My belief, though, is if it's made by man, at some point it's going to fail. I read an article that said when they tested those blowout preventers, even with government-supervised agency there, 44% of them failed. That's not good enough. They need better procedures, better technology. We need the energy, though, and we must keep on drilling, doing whatever's necessary. It's very unfortunate. I don't excuse it. But I promise you that China, Venezuela, the other countries around the world, they have not stopped drilling. We need to fix the problem and continue on.
Governor Halter.
Yes, the liability limit should absolutely be raised. Oil companies ought to be held fully accountable for the damage that they are causing or have caused in the Gulf. But I think the bigger point is the one you were headed towards, Steve, which is that this points out that we need a comprehensive policy to develop alternative energy. Not only would it help us environmentally, but it would help us on the national security front, and importantly, it would help us to create jobs. China is driving to be the leading country and producer of alternative energy technologies. That would be the first time in decades that the United States has not been the technology leader in the world in the development of the next wave of technologies and industries, and we absolutely need to pursue that and lead that. And I would also say that it points out the power of these special interest groups in Washington to prevent change. We have known about this problem for 35 years, but the fact is big oil makes immense campaign contributions and has undue influence as a result of that, and that is part of why 35 years later we still don't have an appropriate alternative energy policy.
Call time. Thank you, Mr. Halter. Senator Lincoln.
Yes, I also believe that the liability should be increased, and I think without a doubt those oil companies, particularly British Petroleum, should be held completely accountable for any of the damages that occurred, not only in the coastline, but also to industries and businesses that have suffered. I also believe that we need to move ourselves from an old energy economy to a new energy economy, but I also don't think that we can do that in a purest sense without recognizing that we have become very addicted to oil, and we've got to make sure that as we move ourselves away from that old energy economy to a new renewable energy economy, that we don't put particularly low-income Americans or our jobs and industries at risk. There are great ways to do that. We passed a bipartisan bill out of the Senate Energy Committee, which really set renewable energy standards, but it also made sure as we moved into wind and solar power, as well as more nuclear, more responsible nuclear power, hydropower, and others, that we could wean ourselves off of that dependence on foreign oil, as well as domestic oil, but we still had to maintain some domestic drilling. I also agree with the President that there should be a moratorium on any new drilling off the coast of the U.S. until we understand what has happened and if we've got a better handle on how we're going to react to it next time if it happens again.
Time, Senator. Next question begins with Senator Lincoln. In your own, Describe for us, Senator, who the U.S. Chamber of Commerce represents and who does organized labor represent?
Well, I think if you look at their membership, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce recognizes and represents most of our small businesses across the state. They also represent some of the larger industries and businesses. They represent the jobs out there that we hope to create. I think in that sense, they also represent a similar constituency that the labor unions represent, and that's the workers. The labor unions do specifically represent only unionized shops. I've always supported workers' rights to organize and always will. We are in a right-to-work state, and really 97% of our workers are working for small businesses, which means that if small businesses were required to adhere to some of the labor laws, particularly the Employee Free Choice Act, it would put them at a huge disadvantage in this already fragile economy. So I think it's basically, they both represent workers and jobs. The labor unions represent the unionized workers, and the chamber represents the businesses as well as the workers in our country and in this state.
Mr. Morrison.
The question is, who does the Chamber of Commerce represent?
Who does the chamber represent, and who does labor?
The Chamber represents small business nationwide. They're a great organization. They lobby for benefits, legislation and benefits that will support small business. You've got to be 100% in favor of that. I also support the rights of workers and individuals to organize where they see fit through the secret ballot. I think that's fine. Everybody deserves dignity and respect in the workplace, and they deserve to have these organizations. I think, you know, what we a lot of times forget, a lot of our police and firemen are members of benevolent associations, and I think that's great. They need to be able to speak up for themselves. If they didn't, in some small towns, not in Arkansas probably, but somewhere else, the mayor would have them mowing their lawn. So they need to have a voice and representation. So that's
We're in deficit again, Mr. Governor Halter.
Well, Steve, I think the more interesting question is who on this stage represents the Chamber of Commerce and who represents working men and women. And the fact is that right now, a group that was originally related to the Chamber of Commerce is spending $1.5 million of negative ads on me, not identifying who they are, not identifying the donors, and basically trying to tell the big lie. I'm proud of having the support of working men and women in Arkansas, and I'm proud to stand up for working men and women in Arkansas. You know, John Brummett yesterday pointed out in his article that about this group, why would a Republican group back Senator Lincoln now when they got John Bozeman waiting in November? Is it that she's approximately as good a Republican as Bozeman? Or is it the Republicans fear the change message of Halter? That's the conclusion that John Brummett came to yesterday.
Next question goes to Mr. Morrison first. Agree or disagree, sir, campaign spending is virtually out of control under recent Supreme Court decisions. There appears to be very little we can do about it other than to perhaps legislate disclosure. Are you in favor of that? 100% transparency on political spending.
Yeah. Am I in favor of legislating disclosure of political spending? Is that the question? I'm having trouble hearing you. Am I in favor of legislating disclosure?
Complete disclosure on spending.
Yeah, we've had a lot of political spending on television, that's for sure, more than we wanted. Millions and millions of dollars. We just changed the channel at our house. You know, if money would solve all of our problems, the movie stars in California wouldn't be in mental institutions and taking a tax against their wife and all of that. Money will not solve all of our problems, and this year, the most money may not get you elected. My campaign, as a lot of people like to point out, is poorly financed. My wife and I have spent quite a bit of our own money because we love our country and we love the state of Arkansas. So I appreciate that. My campaign has been supported by grassroots, phone calls, person to person, and
Gotta call times.
if I hear one more time, I'm a candidate so-and-so and I support this ad, I think I'm going to faint. So I think we've had quite enough of it. Thank you.
And with that time, all right, Governor Holt.
Thanks, DC, for the levity. I do think we need that. But let me say this. I do think that we ought to have absolute disclosure of these campaign spending practices. And I said earlier that my first bill as your next United States Senator would be to remove the tax breaks that encourage American companies to send jobs overseas. But my second bill would be to plug all these loopholes. We literally don't know, and we probably won't know, who is spending $1.5 million in this race to try to buy a United States Senate seat. We know who they're for, we know who they're against, but we don't have the first clue who it is, and we don't have the first clue why they're doing it. And that's wrong. That undermines our democracy. I think it's a real danger, and it puts the potential out there for billionaires to be able to have too much impact on our politics in a way that's undisclosed. It could be that somebody really wants the estate tax completely eliminated, and they feel like that for $1.5 million they can get there.
Time. Thank
That's
you, Governor.
dangerous.
Thank you. Senator Lincoln.
Well, I believe from Bill's comments, it seems as if you're a member of the chamber, you can only be a Republican, and if you're a member of a union, you can only be a Democrat, and I don't believe that's the case. I think it is clear that if I looked in the mailbox from here in Little Rock this week, people got 7 pieces of mail. I don't know how many of you all got that. 4 of them were negative against me, sponsored by the unions. One of them was positive that I sent out myself. One of them was negative against Bill, which was one that we've both said has no business being in Arkansas. It's a group. And then the other was, I can't even remember now. I think it was another negative one probably against me. But the fact is we should do away with all of that. I'd be glad to do away with the negative, all of the negativity in this campaign. I'd be glad to do away with any of that. I know that my campaign and all of the disclosure we have is the heaviest disclosure of anything, whether it's the funds we've raised, the $4 million that I've raised from Arkansans. Bill likes to talk about the $1 million that comes from other places, but $4 million came from Arkansas and Arkansans, and I think that's important. So I think disclosure is important without a doubt, and certainly those, I'm on the bill, the Schumer bill, that would actually require that people would have to disclose who they are, where their money comes from, and they'd actually have to put their CEO out there in front saying that.
Time, Senator. Thank you. Next question for Governor Holt, beginning with Governor Halter. Sir, can you give a definitive up or down answer to card check?
Yes, sir. Definitively, card check is dead in the United States Senate. It's not going anywhere. Labor leadership is not pushing for it.
Before it died, would you have supported it?
I will tell you that here's what I'm in favor of. I am in favor of streamlined, democratic, secret ballot elections. I am in favor of them occurring more rapidly so there's less opportunity to coerce workers. I'm in favor of increased penalties on either side if there's an attempt to coerce workers. But I will point out that what I'm not going to do is come up here and do what Senator Lincoln has done, which is to be a sponsor of the Employee Free Choice Act, and then when it comes to a vote, be against it, and then go to the floor and say that she would filibuster it. The fact is that this issue is not under discussion now in the United States Senate. And I would just simply say, I'm not going to give stands on issues and then be forced to reverse course. That's not what we're doing, and I'm certainly not going to take stands on issues that are no longer relevant.
Time. Thank you, sir. Senator Lincoln.
Well, our country is enduring the toughest economic climate since the Great Depression. This issue is divisive, It creates distractions at a time when we should be focusing on putting our economy back on track and, more importantly, putting people back to work and creating jobs. Now, Mr. Trumka, who is the president of the AFL-CIO, just last week said it's not a dead issue. They have every intention of moving this issue, that there is no compromise, and that they are moving this issue. I don't think it's the appropriate issue for right now. I don't support it because it does take away the secret ballot, and I also think that it unfortunately puts workers and businesses in a compromising situation. They should be coming together right now, creating jobs, creating those manufacturing jobs, putting our economy back on track, and you cannot do that when you create these divisive and distracting issues. So clearly it's back on the table if it ever was off, and I think it's the appropriate issue and time for all of it.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes, I think the secret ballot in our society is sacred. I think the secret ballot should be preserved. I think we need balance between labor and management. They each have rights. You can read some articles that want to blame the labor unions for the bankruptcy of GM. I disagree with that. Poor management is what led to the bankruptcy of GM. I think that labor unions can sometimes go too far. I know that in my earlier career when I sold farm chemicals in Helena, there was a great company over there, Mohawk Rubber. All of the guys had nice new houses, a new pickup truck, and a fishing boat. It was a great company. The labor union got them to strike, and the company went out of business. So there has to be balance. But on another occasion, a trucking company that I'm familiar with here in Little Rock, their labor union has helped save the company because of management mistakes. The labor union came in and helped save the company. So we need balance.
Time. Thank you very much, Mr. Morrison. Our final question of the afternoon, beginning with Senator Lincoln. Forgetting, Senator, third-party advertising, statements by your surrogates, consider just what you have said yourself to and about your opponents, to the electorate. Can you say that you have elevated the level of political discourse? Did you elevate the debate or lower it in this campaign?
I feel like my biggest effort here was to definitely elevate the campaign and to work hard to point out the things that I have done, what it means to me to be an Arkansan and what it means to me to go to Washington and fight on behalf of Arkansas and the people of Arkansas. I have not run a negative campaign. I have run a comparative campaign, and I think it's important. I go to the Senate every day and take difficult votes. And I have done that, and I make good decisions based on what I hear from Arkansans and what I know is going to be helpful to Arkansas and our economy and growing our great state. It's unfortunate the other two have not done that. They have not taken those votes, but they're going to have to if they get elected. And I think that's important to remind people that you have to take a stand, whether it's on EFCA or whether it's on trade or whether it's on Social Security. At some point, you've got to stand up and be counted, and you've got to take a vote. I've done that, and I've done it every single time with the idea of what it means to Arkansas, and will it help us grow to be the strong state and the strong people that I know we're capable of being, and that's exactly what I've tried to portray in my campaigns.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, I have no trouble making up my mind, and I'm not afraid to take votes. I'm not afraid to answer to the people of Arkansas and the people of the United States. I want to do what's right for ourselves right now and for our children. So I think I've tried to elevate the debate. I've tried to work hard, door to door, face to face, grassroots. That's been my campaign, and that's how we're going to continue from now through Tuesday.
Governor Halter.
Well, I don't know how you can characterize Senator Lincoln elevating the campaign, putting the state's lieutenant governor's picture inside a prescription pill bottle. That wasn't a third party, that was you, and you've admitted it. You mentioned 7 mailers in the mail this week. Your campaign, not third party groups, your campaign has put out 7 negative mailers on me. And they're not comparative, they're not true. And don't take my word for it. John Brummett yesterday wrote that he was going to vote for you but instead he's now voting for me because of what he calls disenchantment with Lincoln's cynically dishonest campaign. Don't take my word for it. Now, you've been pushing this idea that somehow I've been responsible for outsourcing jobs. The truth is, those companies that I've been involved with have created over 2,000 jobs, and not a single American job was moved overseas. I'll finish with this in the end, Steve. Thank you very much.
Governor, thank you very much. Under terms that were agreed to by the candidates prior to the debate, with time now for our closing arguments, we begin with Governor Halter.
Thank you very much, Steve. Over the last 4 years, I've had literally thousands of conversations with Arkansans from all over the state. And what I've found is that they believe that Washington is not working for them. On the second day that I got in this race, I got a letter from an elderly couple, 80 years old, in Hot Springs Village. They said, "Dear Lieutenant Governor Halter," enclosed $50, "we're on fixed income, but we believe that Washington is taking advantage of us." People are frustrated with bailouts. They don't believe that Washington listens to them anymore, and they believe that special interest money has too much influence in our politics. As your next United States Senator, I will continue to work to advance education, just like we did with the scholarship lottery, so that Arkansans can have the opportunity to live up to their God-given potential. We need to get the economy moving again, and the first thing I will do is introduce a bill to eliminate the tax provisions to ship jobs overseas and instead use those monies to create jobs here at home. Now, the last 10 weeks, there have been an incredible amount of negative campaigning. But the hits on me in the last 10 weeks are nothing like the hits on Arkansas families over the last 10 years because of a Wall Street irresponsible behavior and lax Washington oversight. The choice here is simple. You can continue with the same Washington policies, or you can vote for change. Because if you send the same people back to Washington, you are guaranteed to get the same result. On Tuesday, though, your vote can overpower the money and special interests. I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lincoln.
Thank you, Steve, and we appreciate all of your duties here today. I want to take the opportunity to also thank the Political Animals Club and the Clinton School of Public Service. And I also want to thank all of you all who've taken time out of your schedule to be here and be a part of this today. I also want to thank the hundreds of candidates and volunteers, supporters, and activists who make our democratic process here in Arkansas so uniquely personal and rewarding to all of us. I think it's truly American, and the way that we come about this opportunity is wonderful. It's been said that this race is about choices, and it is about choices. It's also about jobs and the economy. Which candidate is in the best position to influence events so that Arkansas emerges from the economic crisis stronger and more resilient than ever? I've worked hard to become the first Arkansan ever to chair the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. Now that I'm here, I'm not waiting for things to happen. I'm making things happen. I passed Disaster Aid in 3 months, where it's taken us 2 years before. I wrote the most ambitious child nutrition reauthorization bill ever. And as we've discussed here, I've also written the toughest bill on Wall Street that's been proposed by the administration or anyone else in Congress. And in addition, I forced USDA to expand their timber sale program to put 700 Arkansas timber workers back to work, secured $2 million in grants last week for Arkansas's minority farmers and ranchers. I steered a grant to East Arkansas for development of broadband capabilities that are going to allow us to bring accessible and affordable internet service to rural counties in all of Arkansas. Ladies and gentlemen, I am working daily to create economic opportunities to lead to more jobs in our state. Whether you're talking about tax incentives for energy-efficient appliances that we produce or a multitude of other things, I don't think any other candidate can legitimately make those claims. Promises maybe, but results, no. I've fought the tough battles for you, and I'll wear the political scars to prove it. I understand why voters are angry with Washington, and I share their frustration, and that's what I have worked hard for you on behalf of, is to clean Washington up. But it won't stop me from working together with whomever it takes to get Arkansas what it deserves. Thank you, and certainly would appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Morrison.
Yes. The government can create a government job. It's very difficult for the government to create jobs that really last in private industry. What they need to do is cut taxes and live responsibly. We're spending more than we're earning. When I began this campaign, I did it because I felt like it needed to be done. I've worked very hard. I've gone door to door. I've been welcomed into the homes of people, the businesses of people all over the state. They've said that they want to help me. They have helped me. I think that I am going to shock the entire nation on Tuesday, and I want you to vote for me. We need change in Washington. Our representatives and senators are reelected at a higher rate than the Politburo members were in the old USSR. I have taken a huge challenge, and I have loved every minute of it. More government programs, more big government is not the solution to the problem. Big government is the problem. Hard work, personal responsibility will go a long way to restoring the United States of America. That's why I'm running. I want to give you a choice to do something different in Washington, and I'm asking for your vote today, Monday, and Tuesday. Thank you very much.
In keeping with the animals pledge to get you out of here as close to 1 o'clock, we missed it by 2 or 3 minutes, but that's not bad. Our thanks very much to all three candidates tonight.